finding the area of a right triangle using the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so that tells us we're going to do two things. We're going to find the area of a right triangle, and we're going to use Pythagorean theorem. So we need a couple of things here. First, the area of a triangle. We need to remember that that's 1/2 base times height. And we've used this a couple of times over the last few weeks. So I'm hoping that we definitely remember this one by now. So we need to know base and height. But we also need to know Pythagorean theorem. And most students know this one as soon as I start writing it here. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. They just, for whatever reason, don't always remember Pythagorean theorem, the name to the actual equation here. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So in order to use this, I need a right triangle. So A and B are the legs that make the 90. C is always the one that's across from the 90. So A and B are a little interchangeable. I could put A here and B here, or I could switch it and go B and A. Those ones aren't as important when you do it. The only thing that you have to make sure is that they never land over here across from the 90. That's always the C. So the two legs squared and added together always equal the hypotenuse squared. And that's also what we call this, is the hypotenuse, is across from the 90. All right, so now that we have those pieces we need, let's go ahead and take a look at our problem. So find the area of a right triangle. Be sure to include the correct unit in your answer. So they give us 7, and they give us nothing on this one, but they give us 25 here. The reason we need this one where they haven't given us anything is I need a base and a height. And in order to be considered a base and a height, they have to create a 90-degree angle. So I need the two side lengths that create a 90-degree angle. That's why we need Pythagorean theorem real quick to figure it out, because if we have a right angle, we can use Pythagorean theorem to figure out what is your missing side. And that'll be my, we'll call it height in this case. So we need that height so that we can go height times base and then divide by 2. All right, so there's my explanation. So we have, and remember the A and the B are the ones that create the 90. So we have A, I'm just calling this one A for whatever reason, and we need B. So 7 squared plus, I'm just going to write B squared equals C squared. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So we have 49 plus B equals, and I do not know 25 squared right off the top of my head. That's a big one. Equals, all right, 625. And then we want to solve for B here. So we're going to subtract 49 from both sides. And we have B equals, and we want to go minus 49 equals, oops, sorry, I forgot my, bring down my squared. We have 576. So we don't want to know what B squared is. Our last step is to make sure we take the square root of both sides. Remember, B squared means B times B. And a square root just means that you can multiply the same number to get the one answer. So B times B, that means I have the same number multiplied to get B squared. I can take one of those B's out. That's what the square root is. A B squared is B. And to find the square root of this 576, I already have it in my calculator. I can click this square root button. So sometimes it looks like this. There's no number here. And sometimes, I'm going to grab my other calculator, it looks like this. And it's got a little 2 there. It took a minute for my calculator to pop up. So you can see the 2 on the calculator here. And you can see this one. This one's on my computer. This is the same one that pops up on iPhones when you turn it sideways, as long as you don't have your screen locked. If it doesn't have a 2, though, it still means square root. So without the 2, it's the assumption. You automatically assume the 2 is there. It's a square root. So for this calculator, I have to click the square root first and then type in the number. So for the calculator that I brought up on my computer or the one that you use on your phone, you usually have to have the number typed in and then click square root. So you just have to pay attention to your technology and what you need to do. So the square root is 24. So now I know this length here. Are we done? No, it wants us to find the area. So now I'm going to switch my color here and I'm going to go area equals 1/2, because I'm going back up here to this equation, base, which I'm calling 7, times our height that we just found. So remember, the 25 doesn't actually go into the area formula. We need that for Pythagorean theorem because we need to figure out this length. For the area formula, I need to know the lengths that connect this 90 degree. I need the base and the height. A height has to be at a 90-degree angle in order to be considered a height. All right, so area equals, and we're going to go back to our handy dandy calculator. So we already have 24 in here, times 7. So we get 168. We don't have a fraction bar necessarily. Although actually, if you go like this, I'm going to clear this out real quick. If I go 1 divided by 2, a fraction does pop up. And then I just hit my over arrow, or make sure you click off to the side, and you can go times 168. So if the calculator is available to you, that's great. Sometimes it's not always available. But I can click this, and it'll give me 84. If this calculator is not available, most calculators don't put a fraction in. So you could just go 168 divided by 2, and you'd get the exact same answer. Because multiplying by 1/2 is the same thing as dividing by this 2. Because remember, the top of a fraction means multiplication, the bottom means division. All right, so we know that it equals 84 meters squared. The reason it's meters squared is because both of these are meters. So treat them just like you would like if it was a variable m. M times m is, didn't write 84, m squared. So it just tells you right away this is an area. Let's go ahead and complete a problem here. Okay. Change over. All right, so we have 20 going along the top here, and I'm just going to call that the base because remember, base and height are the ones that connect to this 90. We don't have our height, but we do have the hypotenuse. So we're going to jump straight in to Pythagorean theorem here. So we have 20 squared plus b, and remember this is the a and the b. This b has nothing to do with this one necessarily. This means base. This just means the leg that makes the 90 degree in a right triangle. So even though we're using b for both, they don't actually mean the same thing. So 20 squared plus b squared equals 25 squared. So 20 squared, I know that's 400. And if you don't have your squares memorized, perfectly fine. You can always use a calculator. This one we just did was 625. So on a calculator too, you can go 20, and then you can hit the little square button. And that's pretty universal. That's what it'll look like. So you go like that and hit equals. You get 400. All right, so now we want to solve for b squared. So we're going to subtract 400 from both sides. 400 minus 400 goes away. We bring b squared down, and that's going to equal 225 when I subtract. So don't forget, we don't want to know what b squared is. We want to take the square root. If you plug in 225, you're going to get a huge number into your area formula. We don't want 225. We want to know the square root. Ah, darn it. I forgot. You have to type in that first and then 225. Equals 15. So b equals 15. And if you know your squares, this does make it a little bit easier and faster so that you don't necessarily have to use a calculator to find these. But if you don't know them, you don't have them memorized, perfectly fine. Just pull up the calculator and go ahead and use it that way. All right, so we still need to plug in this length to our area formula. So remember, now we have 20. This length going down is 15. So we're just going to go area equals 1/2 20 times 15, like that. We have area equals 1/2, and I'm going to go, I already have 15 typed in here, so I'm going to hit times 20, and it'll just keep the 15 equals, so I know it's 300. Area equals, and we just want to do, remember, you can either go times, and then if I do 1 divided by 2, it'll put that fraction in there for me, but I can also just say 300 divided by 2 means the same thing. I'll get the same answer. It just depends on the calculator you have available to you. Most calculators do not insert a fraction for you. And if they don't insert a fraction, your other option, if you forget that that division means that, you can go 300 and open parenthesis. So you do open parenthesis. I did that with my keyboard. And then you go 1. Instead of it doing the half like this, what it would do is put this division symbol actually in there. And then you put end parenthesis. And then that'll tell the calculator you want to make sure that you're multiplying 300 by the whole 1/2. If you don't put the parenthesis in, it's going to multiply and divide a little funky. So you want to make sure that you're doing it correctly. But that's another option, is to use the parentheses on your calculator. All right, so we know that it is 150. They were centimeters, and it's an area, so I know it's centimeters squared. So this one, remember, each one of these has a centimeter on them. Centimeter times centimeter gets me centimeters squared. Check. Yay! All right, next one. Erase all this stuff and start over. All right, so again, we need this bottom length here. We're given the height and the hypotenuse, but not the bottom length. So we need to go to our Pythagorean theorem. We have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. All right, so let's go over here. So, whoops, I'll use the calculator this time. 21 squared equals 441 plus b squared equals 29 squared, which is 841. And I want to subtract 441 from both sides. Because remember, my goal is always to get this variable by itself. So 441 minus 441, that was supposed to be a 1, cancels. And I bring b squared down, equals. And if I subtract these, it looks like I'm going to end up with 400 here. So 0, 0, 4. All right, and I want the square root of 400. So I know b is going to equal, and I know the square root of 400 off the top of my head because I have that one memorized. So I know that it's 20. If you didn't know that it was 20, so you come over here and I'm subtracting 441. There's my 400. I just need to make sure that I click this first and then 400 equals 20. All right, so we have to plug it in. Now this is the base, and this is the height. So I have area equals 1/2 base times height. So I get 20 times 21 equals A equals 1/2 420. And so again, I'm just going to divide, and that was a really ugly, supposed to be a 4. So I can just click divide by 2, and I will have my answer. So here's 210, and then remember this was meters and meters. So just like a variable, meter times meter gives me meters squared. So I'm going to type in 210. I'm going to scroll over here and click meters squared and check. All right, one more, and then we're all done with week 29. Woo! Fancy, fancy. Okay, so again, we need our Pythagorean theorem. We don't have the height. We do have a base, and we have a hypotenuse. So I'm going to go, this time I'm going to call it a squared plus 12 squared equals 13 squared. Again, a and b are not terribly important as long as they're the two that make this 90 degree. So one has to be a and one has to be b. So a squared equals 100, whoops, not equals, silly, I changed my plus sign, plus 144, 12 squared is 144, equals 13 squared, which is 169. Again, I do have some of these memorized. Generally up to about 20, but keep in mind I'm also a math teacher that goes all the way up to trig, so that's part of the reason I have these memorized. It does make things easier if you have, say, like your squares, some of your cubes memorized, definitely your times tables. That makes everything so much easier. It's not necessarily that it's required in order for you to do math, but the more you have the simple basic stuff memorized, like times tables, for example, you don't have to spend time trying to figure out what is this number divided by this number, because you already know it, it's memorized, you just write it down. So if you don't have your times tables memorized, there's also programs in here that I can add that let you practice your times tables, just so that it's a little extra practice for you. So I'm going to subtract 144 from both sides so that I can get a squared all by itself, because 144 minus 144 cancels. And then I want to subtract, so I end up with 5 and 2, so 25. Take the square root. A equals, and I know the square root of 25 is 5. because 5 times 5 gets me 25. All right, so we have our height and we have our base. Let's go ahead and plug it in. Area equals 1/2 base times height. Area equals, and I know 12 times 5 is 60. I'm just doing a little bit of mental math there. See, my times tables help me. That does make it a little faster if you know your times tables. So I don't have to bother with going to the calculator. And then I also remember this means divide by 2. 60 divided by 2 is 30. So it does make it faster if you have your time tables memorized. Now keep in mind you want to make sure this was centimeters and centimeters. Centimeter times centimeter is centimeters squared. So then I come over here and I click squared and I check. Yay! And that was the last one for me for week 29. So it depends on which order you did. If you clicked up here and you kind of changed your order, you may have more to do, but this was the last one for me.